We are currently without Patrick. Hopefully he will join us momentarily. But I am Pronago, and joining me is IskatuMesk. And today, on this episode of the Big Boys Table, we're going to be discussing motivation and custom content. Now, as fate would have it, I was always planning on doing this for the next episode of this podcast, just talking about custom content in general. But Blizzard has announced today that they will be monetizing content on the marketplace, specifically, or the map marketplace. They will be monetizing arcade content. Specifically, they will be launching this sort of thing with two maps, one of which is created by Pirate, who you may know if you're familiar with the arcade scene, and the other one of which is created by Tia, whom I've played some of their maps in the past, but not really personally familiar with them or acquainted.
I have heard legends from the occasional person who still goes to StarCraft 2, like in Ricky's event, that that person makes really dreadfully bad maps.
Well, I can't really speak to their quality. I just know that they were... I think they're very... they're based around like the Desert Strike stuff.
So basically terrible.
I'm not personally familiar with it. I won't speak to any qualities. I just know
At
that
least
they are
incredibly uncreative.
two of them. These are the two maps that we have that are premium.
Maps, do you have a link for or can you just show us some of the screenshots so we can have some context here?
Sure, I'll drop this in the chat, and then I'll just drop it on my stream chat as well, so everybody can follow along.
I just want to see if they have any custom assets or anything like that, like the basic stuff.
Yes, Arcstar does. You'll have to take a look at the YouTube video. There's no screenshots embedded on this shareware
Using
malware
YouTube
video.
on something that's supposed to be monetized. SMH, off to a bad start already.
Yeah, it's like a minute. Oh shit! It's a minute. It's a bit of a trailer. I forgot to change my input. So there are custom assets in Arcstar. It appears. I can't quite speak to their quality.
Well, let me have a look.
Take a look. So while Mesk takes a look, the reason why this is pertinent is because we got to figure out what motivates custom content creators. It's a constant struggle, if you will.
Oh, this stuff he was working on like 4 years ago.
Yes, he's been at this for a while.
All right, so this is predominantly all default assets that I've seen so far. He made the line things. The outline effect looks absolutely horrendous. Actually, that's like that looks terrible. I don't know why he did that. But, no, this is something he's been working on for a while. So, Pirate...
well, you've worked with Pirate before, so...
Yes,
you can have some insight.
He won the Rock the Cabinet contest, I think the second one, was it? With a Dwarven Combat for $10,000. I taught him quite a large chunk of 3D stuff. I did voice acting and normal maps for some of the assets that he ported. So, he ended up learning quite well and picking up 3ds Max and doing stuff after that. You wouldn't tell it by looking at this video, though. Jesus Christ. This is, but he was always talking about Rogue Star, which was a previous project to his, turn-based. That's basically what this is. This is basically his previous project. It's just he's applied this outline to everything that looks really awful. And he was quite actively researching stuff with it. He was quite actively researching with it. But the thing is this sets a terrible precedent, I think, because there's nothing custom about this. There's no custom assets. I'm listening for voice acting.
I don't think there's any in that preview.
So there's no voice acting, no custom assets. What are you paying for? Exactly the same thing every other map has. Randomized loot and every other generic thing everybody's been shoehorning into random genres since gaming basically died in like 2001. Okay, that's a really terrible example. Let's take a look at the other project. I'm not saying like
I don't think it's particularly any.
I'm not speaking about the like the overall playability of the project, but
well, yeah, we can't know that.
You're paying for something that is not at all new, so it's
Well,
very,
there
very
is
hard
no
to justify that.
There is no free version of that Dark Star map or Arc Star map that
Direct Strike, by the way, is an utterly terrible name. And this is units auto-attacking into each other? Is that supposed to be the theme of this map? I'm not... Oh, yes, I remember. Crazy had me play a couple of times with them. I see units clipping into each other, so poorly configured collision, no custom assets. This, there's some shields or something floating in the air. That looks really strange. This is
there's
Blizzard.
some glazes on units, some glaze effects.
This is Blizzard's idea of monetizable maps. So basically, just by looking at these videos, we have set the precedent that every single map currently on the arcade, including like Ricky's Warlords and Merchants, and you know, all the incomplete stuff, all the melee maps, all those are worthy of being monetized because they all have the same level of, you know, depth to them that any of these do, basically.
Well, it seems to me that I can't really speak to any calling card of either of these showcases, especially Direct Strike's video. Like, Arcstar is a completely different genre than, well, not really than anything else in the marketplace, probably anything else in the arcade, but I haven't looked at enough custom maps in StarCraft 2 to really know if there are any things that are like Arcstar. So to me, it seems...
Every given indie game on Steam right now.
Right, I mean, within the arcade itself. I haven't seen any particular examples of that. But Direct Strike is... I see nothing that really that really stands out from anything else. And I could be mistaken, and it could be that Blizzard is really, really bad at advertising these maps. But given what we know about Blizzard and advertising, I kind of find that a little hard to believe.
Let's just take a step back for a moment. Let's consider for a moment what makes a completed map. What makes a completed project? So the obvious things, the voice acting and the assets, you know, custom stuff that says the developer actually got interactive with their project. We don't see either of that with these. In Direct Strike, we don't even see terrain. There is just flat, repeating, identical textures everywhere for everything. So there's no effort placed in that. So now we got to talk about the gameplay. Now I know that Pirate put a lot of time into trying to get his I guess you could call it like a mod of an engine, like the mechanisms for units moving around in the combat engine and stuff. He spent quite a long time trying to like fine tune that and get it to work pretty well. And that's basically like the driving theme for his map. And it's kind of sad in a way because I think if he had put the same amount of effort into Unreal, he would be so much further along than he is. He'd be making more money off of it, and he would have a higher quality product to show because the thing is that when you don't actually put anything custom into your project can only be as good as something that's heavily derivative of its existing work. And I think we can all agree that StarCraft 2 doesn't look or sound very good. But it's like, especially with Direct Strike, it's like there wasn't even an effort to work with the existing assets. We've got the Ultralisks just freely clipping into each other. We've got not even the slightest attempt at terrain whatsoever. And the gameplay showcase for this, as opposed to Arcstar, is just units auto-attacking each other. There is nothing engaging about it whatsoever. And I don't think this is Blizzard's fault. I think this is just the map, because the map is just units auto-moving into each other. It's kind of like Dota in the sense that Dota was extraordinarily successful because people who still played Warcraft 3 didn't want to actually put in the effort to become good at Warcraft 3, so they wanted to play something that was really easy in Warcraft 3. And that's kind of like the same way with StarCraft 2, because StarCraft 2 is an easier game than Warcraft 3, but it's still too hard for most people. So they'd rather play something that really just requires like no cerebral activity at all. So they play a lot of these maps that just auto-move units into each other and call it a day. Castle Fight clones, except this doesn't even have the strategy of Castle Fight at all. And Crazy introduced me to some of these maps. I played a few of them with him. Now, the arcade has some interesting stuff in it. There's Star Battle, which I'm sure you're at least somewhat familiar with.
Action
and obviously it's one of those maps that's very, very, very low entry barrier, very, very low skill ceiling. But, you know, it's kind of like an interesting twist away from Melee with StarCraft 2. But the vast majority of them, the end theme is to make the game easier. And that's definitely not something you want to be promoting for your flagship thing, is something that reduces StarCraft 2, just simply watching units auto-attack each other, and yet that's precisely what it is. And there's no other engaging theme, at least, from the perspective of this video, that says, this is worth your money. It's like, if I want to watch units auto-attack each other, I'm just going to play StarCraft 2, right? So it's not really a good start. Or at least Pirates project has the kind of technical element behind it, but I might be kind of biased in that regard because I'm more or less familiar with the kind of effort and work that he put into it. So I am kind of more biased in its favor because I'm aware of that. But most people are not going to be aware of that, and they're just going to see it as yet another, Diablo clone. Or actually, I think this is a clone of.
It would be something turn-based. I'm not familiar with the source
it's turn-based, but it's the loot system and everything is all cloned off of Diablo. But the engine is cloned off of Transistor, I believe it was.
That does sound familiar.
So
I believe he was
I found that
discussing
concept
on
kind of interesting.
But...
Transistor looked really boring as a game, but the ideas were actually kind of neat, and Pirates' interpretations of them in StarCraft 2 were kind of neat. But most people aren't going to see it that way. There's just going to be like, oh, it's another person making a turn-based Diablo clone. And there's no custom assets or anything. So I believe I discussed this in our last discussion. I discussed StarCrafts.
Yes.
And what really interests me about this is, like, I always knew that Blizzard has been trying to get the marketplace in forever, and we believe we discussed that to some extent last time. It on one hand, it doesn't surprise me to see it come up now because StarCraft 2 is well past the end of its life, and Blizzard doesn't want to put effort into it. That's why they have the DLC system into it, and I think the DLC system was kind of like them tasting the waters to see how secure their system is. Obviously, the marketplace is something that was publicated and advertised for the game, and I'll talk about the motivation and stuff because that's kind of a big deal. I think we've talked about that in the past, actually, but there was other things I wanted to add to that discussion. And that does actually kind of play into this because like I was saying, what really interests me about this is I was doing technical and recruiting and, training and stuff for StarCrafts, Carbot StarCrafts. Now, that's like basically the biggest thing StarCraft has ever had, except for maybe Day 9. And the whole idea was that was going to be the project that Blizzard launches the marketplace platform with. And I'm not saying this like this is the doe I dreamy wishes. This is literally what Blizzard was telling us, or at least what Blizzard was telling the team leads that then told me. So they never told me precisely why it didn't happen, but Blizzard was very, very hard to get to respond to anything. So we talked about that last time, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, they were pretty hard to reach.
Yeah,
be weeks between contact and stuff.
So the motivation thing about this that's interesting is StarCraft was intended to have a lot of post-release support. Now, obviously, there's things like the map had like missing minerals and other really basic shit people should have looked at. But also, like, some units weren't converted. I think like the death animation for the Archon didn't have a StarCraft equivalent graphic for it, and a couple of other stuff. And we were supposed to be contracted into providing, post-release support. And then there was talk about royalties. So, if it had made it into the marketplace, we would potentially get, some kind of cut out of that. And obviously none of that happened whatsoever. There was no post-release support, although I think the data editor guy might have done some stuff behind the scenes, but we were never asked to do anything whatsoever ever again. Except for when they tried to recruit me for a YouTube Red production, and I'm very, very glad I did not sign up with that because it's one of the most embarrassing things I've ever fucking seen.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
It was awful, utterly awful. If I had known it was going to be that bad, I would have just told them to fuck off right away. But they were very, very unprofessional about the entire thing. So that's ultimately what made me decide not to get into it. But anyways, like I was saying, the thing is that I think what happened is that when it became evident Blizzard was not going to do the marketplace, at least with us, Carbot et al. Didn't want to get involved anymore. They only wanted the money out of it, and that was their only driving reason. Like, basically, this is something I've observed. This is the same with Pirate, too. Is these people are more invested in their publicity and their image on Reddit than they are in their actual product. I mean, you can kind of just tell that just by looking at the videos, because I know that Pirate has skills in 3ds Max. I know that he has skills in graphics. There was nothing stopping him from, sitting down and being like, let's make some custom stuff for this. But he didn't. He did a very impressive set of particles / animations for the giant in Dwarven Combat, and he ported stuff, and I helped him out, sure, but he ended up, doing a fair amount of legwork himself. So he definitely has the skills. He just didn't apply them here for this. And the Zeratul and Dark Templar graphics are some of the worst in the entire game of StarCraft 2. Like, their animations and everything are absolutely horrendous. So I can't imagine anybody would be working that closely with these graphics on a project for a long time and not want to do something with them, especially seeing as you have access to the assets in the StarCraft 2 Art Tools examples. So you don't even need to reverse engineer them like you would have to do for a lot of things if you wanted to modify them. But considering this guy had like $10,000 to his name, there was nothing saying, if he wanted to pursue this project so in depth that he couldn't just hire help from outside of StarCraft, kind of like Oracle claims to have done, then doesn't really help him out. But what I'm getting at is that all these people, like, both when Pirate released like Dwarven Combat, when Rock the Cabinet was up, and both also when StarCrafts came out, these people were just on the edge of their seat biting their teeth, not because they were worried about how well their project was received, because they were worried about how many likes they were getting on Reddit and how many upvotes they were getting. They were absolutely glued to that. And both of these people, a week after release, never heard from them about the project ever again. StarCraft's basically just ceased to exist a day after it came out. Other than the BlizzCon, the show match, the disastrous map stuff, they talked about that, but they didn't do anything about it as far as I know. At least I wasn't involved in any of that. So, but like the thing is that these people were only interested in the public image they got from these projects and not in the actual thing. And for StarCrafts in particular, that was really quite unusual. But at the same time, it really wasn't, because the person who had made StarCrafts, its creator, Carbot, was not very involved with it whatsoever. He just commissioned people to do it for him, basically. And at the same time, though, that really, like, that kind of always kind of didn't sit well with me. Now, Carbot was not a technical person at all. He basically knew how to do his animations in Flash, and that was basically it. But the detachment always struck me as unusual. Maybe you're not the one actively making the project, but the project is based on something you created. You think you'd really want to at least be a part of that. But at least from my side, which was like dealing with the graphics and stuff that he was handing us, there was basically no interaction whatsoever. And especially after release, there was just nothing. No discussion about fixing stuff, no, talking about where the project is going, whatever, just nothing. And that was it. That was it. And it always makes you wonder, like, the motivations behind people. Now, obviously, StarCraft 2, it releases with the promise of a marketplace that hasn't happened until now, and it's 8 years later.
Yeah, that's pretty big, though. That's, like, an insane amount of time.
Yeah.
With no word either. Like, nobody knew it was coming besides... Well, obviously people who had been informed by the company themselves privately, so...
I have a pretty good idea what happened. So, I'm pretty sure anybody who has, like, any kind of investment into the subject is well aware of the fiasco that happened with Skyrim and Bethesda.
Yes, with paid mods on Steam. Yeah. I think it was 2 years ago now.
Yeah. So, that eventually went through, and lo and behold, it's identical to the system Blizzard is using right now with a few changes to it. Identical in the manner that the developer approaches the user. And I mean, from Blizzard's standpoint, obviously, people who make total conversions like us, we look at these projects and we're scratching our heads wondering how the fuck did these ever get greenlighted for paid anything. But you have to realize that StarCraft 2 has no one in it who can create art. So they're basically like they're on top by extent of being the only survivors of a massacre, basically. And that massacre was the mass exodus of StarCraft 2's release, because StarCraft 2 attracted a lot of people who wanted only money out of it, and then they all left when they realized there was no money to be had.
Right.
And now we enter this very dangerous precedent, which is paying people for a hobby. Because that's what this is. This is a hobby. It doesn't matter if you spend all day doing it, it's still a hobby. You're not making games. You're not a game designer by making a mod. Not if you do it for a year, not if you do it for 20 years. You're not a game designer. And it's a hobby because you aren't even really getting into it. You're not doing all the things that would make you, an actual game developer, designing actual technical systems, making graphics, making assets, managing teams, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. People who have motivations to get into the industry will jump at any chance to identify as game developers without actually being game developers, which means if there's a way for them to make money, they'll do it. And you enter that arena where you've got a project. Now, maybe these two maps are actually really fun. Maybe they're really, really fun to play. Maybe they got some really clever ideas. But they're still just maps in an existing game you've already paid for. There's literally no justification for a consumer to be giving you money for something that isn't even yours to begin with. And as a designer, it's like, now you've been given the opportunity. And this is Bethesda's and obviously Valve's and everyone else, all the game developers' perspective of this is they say, hey, we need to make currency off of this game because we don't want to put energy into making games ourselves. What's a way we can do this hands-free? When we have people making custom content for games, let's tell them they can make money off of it. And then apologists will say, well, they put time into something, so they should be able to be paid for it. Which, of course, is a very weak argument. But that's what people are like nowadays. They pay for, things that aren't even existing as games. They pay for JPEG files in phone games. So why not pay for mods? So the developer gets a cut out of it. I forget what the numbers were. Someone told me the numbers, but I think Valve maybe makes around like 50% or more off of a transaction for Dota 2. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong in that regard, but it's a sizable amount for someone who literally does nothing. And
I know it's 15% for items sold in the marketplace. That's the extent of my knowledge.
So it's quite a hefty chunk. But at the same time, it absolves people of the responsibility to actually make anything to improve. So with Bethesda was like, shit, we got this huge community, one of the biggest surviving mod communities in existence. We can make a lot of money off of this. Now, Bethesda hasn't put effort into developing a game since they launched, like, Morrowind. Everything after that's just basically been a copy-paste of the exact same thing with more middleware on it. That's why you have stuff like horse tilting and all these insane bugs in all their games, because it's Gamebryo and it hasn't been changed in forever. But there's a lot of people doing some pretty wacky stuff with their games. There's the horse mods, the horse cock mods, the vor mods, the really, really amazing, porn games and stuff made in Skyrim. Basically all this top-selling stuff that now you could make money off of it. And most people aren't going to turn down the prospect of basically making free money, because that's what this is. You're absolving yourself of the responsibility of actually having to learn how to do stuff that's actually difficult to do, because now the developer is saying, hey, you can sell your stuff using our game. Now, of course, anybody
stuff
who
they would have
actually
been doing anyways on top of it, right? It's stuff that they were already doing.
Oh, yeah.
And now that they can just generate some sort of income or some sort of revenue as a result of doing what you were already doing anyways before money was even an equation. It's pretty
so scummy.
I think
illegal.
It's pretty manipulative in a sense, because people generally do jump at the idea to make money, but if they were already in the middle of doing something without the prospect of money ever entering the equation, they probably instantly in that moment warp their understanding or their position on what they're working on. It's really weird and sneaky the way that they sort of spring that on you, and the fact that then it died less than 2 days later. That ever actually, has that resurfaced? I haven't been keeping track of that.
So basically, people who actually are invested in the mods realized, wait a second, involving money in a hobby is a terrible idea. Like, let's say you make Warhammer miniatures, or rather you paint them. So you spend a lot of money in Warhammer miniatures to get a decent set. You spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then you got to spend money on painting them. The paint is expensive too. And then you spend your time. And time is really the biggest thing. That's really the biggest argument, is this guy spent X time, so he should be paid Y amount, which is, of course, not a legitimate argument whatsoever. That's not how products are priced. But that would be the argument for something like this: is I spent, X money investing, and then X time investing to create a painted Warhammer miniature. But that's something you do on the side. That's your hobby. You did it because you wanted to do it. And some of these Warhammer miniatures are absolutely insane. The kind of work that people put into them is ridiculous. But it's a hobby, and they don't get paid for it. The most case they might be showcased in a museum or a convention or something, but they're not being compensated for this, and nor should they. They're doing it because they want to do it. So in Skyrim, people were like, "Oh wow, if we introduce money into this, it's going to become insanely toxic." And just the very concept, even though that didn't exist for a long time, the effects of it resonate to this very day. Just the polarity that has been drawn, the divide that has really smashed that community. And I was in a chat with some people making one of the top downloaded, top rated Skyrim mods currently, and has been for a long time. People who date all the way back to Oblivion, who developed 3D stuff and shit for Oblivion. So basically a lot of veterans in that community. And I had a really long discussion with them about this very subject and about the Skyrim thing that came afterwards. And they basically told me that just Bethesda announcing this basically destroyed their community. It created a huge divide. Because you had the people who wanted the instant gratification of making money while not being game developers, and then you had people who actually respected their work. And what it ended up happening is they ended up pulling all their shit. Because, for one, it's basically an unenforceable design. There's no way anyone is going to be able to police people taking stuff from other people's project and selling it. It's basically impossible. Bethesda will never do it because the entire system is designed in a way where Bethesda doesn't have an investment. They don't need to spend money other than maybe bandwidth or license fees on Steam. And people generate currency for them by generating and selling their own content, and it's just all automated. So why would Bethesda get involved? So there's no moderation for it. It's basically down to people reporting stuff and just hoping it works. So people are like, wow, I don't want my content to be sold in someone else's project. So they start yanking it everywhere. Half the projects start vanishing. And then you have entire sites and divisions in the community forming up where it's our mods will always be free. And then other people pull their content because they suddenly want to sell it. So obviously that collapsed into a shithole and disappeared really quickly. But it actually came up again. It is now actually a thing in which Bethesda contacts people and basically they hire them in a contract. They pay them. And apparently there was no numbers given because I guess that's an NDA kind of thing. But apparently it's quite a hefty sum that they give them. It's like an intern contract or something like that. And then they make content on the spot for Bethesda, who then sells that as a microtransaction, but they don't get any royalties off of it. So that's obviously a little different than what Blizzard's doing. But now you have people selling weapons for $5+, individual weapons. And I don't know about you, but Skyrim, I think I picked that up for $10 or $15 or something. I mean, that's the average of what it goes for now, I think. If you find a good deal, it's always on sale. In any event, the monetary value of $5 for a single weapon inside a game like Skyrim is maybe 5 or 6 cents. So, looking at it from a consumer perspective, there's no reason to actually get involved in that. But there'll always be apologies to spend for it. But much like with Blizzard, there was no forewarning about the reincarnation of it. It just kind of popped up. And Bethesda themselves didn't tell anyone any information. It was actually someone involved with it who told information. So it's created another divide. It's split up the user base again. And it's definitely not good. Other than for the people who get a contract, because they get paid up front. So it doesn't matter if they succeeded or not with their content. They're actually probably getting a pretty good deal out of it because most of the content that these things make is maybe a day or less of work. So if you get paid several $100s for one day of work, I mean, who's going to say no to that, right?
Yeah, and I imagine there's maybe there is a clause in there that tells you that you have to support it afterwards, but I imagine that's probably not there.
I don't think so, actually. Yeah. I don't really think so. I mean, Bethesda supporting, not really their cup of tea.
Well, that would be a developer's commitment to updating the file with the new file that you've generated, which is pretty much out of the question. So, yeah, you'd never see that probably. My concern with all of this stuff with modding and monetizing the mods or the maps in StarCraft 2's case, it seems pretty just you're paying for the I mean, first of all, you have the microtransactions already of things like loot boxes in StarCraft 2 and the co-op commanders for the same price that you're paying for these maps. And
greatest scam I've ever seen.
I don't understand what would possibly motivate people to pay the money that they would pay, right? Because there's maps like Ollie's Diablo remake that have just as many years of work put into it as the Arc Star map that we took a look at. It's like a very faithful remake to the first Diablo game, as far as I understand it. I haven't played it personally. And it's called Diablo Immortal Shroud. And that map is apparently something that has had a lot of work put into it, still updated to this day. And
it's been working on that forever.
Yeah, it's been in development, well, released in some form or another for many years now, 3 or 4 years, maybe even more. And, you know, that map has already been out. So there's no way you're going to, just like with StarCraft, you're not going to then pull it and re-release it as a premium map.
Oh, that's what people in Skyrim are doing, yeah. They were pulling their stuff.
And that was the thing with Skyrim too, is that you look at Brood War mods, and especially if they're from around the same era, they pull sound effects from one another, models from unit graphics from one another, projectiles.
Yeah, that's another thing.
It's like,
that's a really good point.
How would you ever figure out how to think about all the things that even just opening these files, and maybe you don't take a component like a sound file or a graphic or something from a total conversion
knowledge,
but you simply you're reverse engineering something. You're figuring out how they did that, and the idea that any of that would have happened to anywhere close to the same degree were it for were it not for the fact that these mods were free, were it not for the fact that there were unprotectors for these custom maps out there, were it not for the fact that we could access this knowledge, or we could access these resources and figure out what we wanted to use from that.
You know, it's funny that you bring up map protectors, because that's one of the biggest cancers in Blizzard's community is map protectors. Let's take a look at Warcraft 3. So Warcraft 3 recently had that patch that came out that modernized a bunch of limits, I guess is the way I would explain it.
It made the object
higher limits exist in many cases, but
it made the editor able to interface with them, basically.
And a lot of maps got broken by that, like really broken. Like we played some maps and shit was fucked. Basically, they need to be patched.
Right.
And 99% of those maps are protected and long abandoned. Mm-hmm. So of course, you're reliant on finding something like XGM, which has reverse engineered them or unprotected them, like they have with like Dota and stuff, or you gotta do it yourself, which is quite a lot of work. Now in StarCraft, at least back when I looked at it before, maps aren't actually protected, but you do lose GUI triggers and they turn into Galaxy. And I've never heard a single person say that Galaxy is any good. Most people much rather prefer to work with GUI. Now, when you talk about stuff like this, obviously communities were never in the mindset of all these people who use stuff like protectors. They were always only concerned about, like, you know, Tony the no-name mapper taking his map and making one change to it. And yeah, if you're like a modder, you've already kind of accepted that that's probably going to happen, and you can't actually do anything about it legally at all. So you just have to accept that or never release your project in the first place.
Yeah,
but there was, of course, people who were like, they didn't care about that. Like, they welcomed it.
Well, that's what my point was going to be, is that I have instructions on how to crack open the map files in my custom campaign that are only not allowed to be opened by conventional editors because they have a custom tile set. Like, I explicitly state, like, this is how you open the maps, and this is where you could look for stuff. Like, I fucking tell people where to look and to take everything that you can see and try and learn from it. Like, that's what I want. I want people to be able to do that, because that's how I fucking learned the ropes. That's how I figured shit out, is because I looked at other maps that I played, or other mods that I had played, and figured out what I like about them, and figured out how those things were assembled. Asked questions to people, but most importantly, just looked at stuff that I personally enjoyed. And if you have these premium maps that other map makers, other content creators do happen to enjoy playing or want to mimic something from or emulate some style of whatever the case may be, so that ugly inking style for the character models in Arcstar or something. I don't know. Like, say that they find something compelling, they want to see if they can make it better or at least use it in their project. How the hell are they going to open up these premium maps? Are there even steps being taken for something like that? You know?
So it's not necessarily like a big issue in a big community, because if you have an already established community, then most of these secrets will already be known.
Right.
I mean, I could do like 90% of this stuff in any of these maps given enough time. But it's like StarCraft 2 doesn't have a community. It has nothing at all. So I mean, this is less of an objective and more like a subjective thing. This is like, the way I feel about this is I'm not necessarily going to give someone my full source projects and say, hey, do whatever you want with them. But if people ask me straight, like, how did you do this? How did you do that? I'll be like, okay, I did this, I did that. And I may give like a very terse answer, but I'm going to give an answer. And I mean, like when I released Armageddon Onslaught, I had looked at the files for, I don't know what it was called, but it was made by BST Rhino or something, and he released all of his iScript with that, and I was like, okay, well, I'm going to release all my iScript for this project too. I only used like 2 things from his project, and it was just out of convenience, not because I couldn't do it, but because it's something I could copy-paste. So I'll just honor the spirit of what he has did. And it's like, you don't lose anything by doing that. You only stand to gain from it, because ultimately, at the end of the day, as a creator, you're either making something for yourself or you're making something for people that you know to enjoy. If you're going for like popularity or whatever, you're basically never going to produce a quality product. And that's been just proven time and time.
It's certainly not anything that you can personally respect, right? Like, the whole idea is that you're going to satisfy your own inner critic with whatever you're making. And
even then, a lot of the time, even that doesn't get satisfied. People just justify it as, well, I need to buy my food, so I'm just going to shit out whatever I can, whatever makes money, and be done with it. So, that's obviously how like Blizzard justifies things. But it's like, in one way you can look at it as just people just trying to make a business out of just like scamming people, which is basically what this is. But in another way, as a developer, you're only really going to see this a lot as a developer. If you're not a developer, it's not really going to ring true to you. But as a developer, to see other developers like doing this to actively take steps to destroy communities and or prevent communities from forming in the first place is kind of sad, because I may not like StarCraft 2. I may not like working with StarCraft 2, but I've always been kind of like watching and waiting and seeing if anybody's ever going to develop something that gets past the performance issues I had with it. But the thing is with StarCraft 2 is nobody ever had any encouragement to communicate with anybody else on anything. Only Delphinium and Taylor Mouse and like Blink Boy and like maybe like 1 or 2 other people would actually like really communicate with me and tell me really what they were doing with anything. And like only freaking Delphinium was like handing out like 3ds Max files and shit. I was like, hey, how did you do this particle effect in 3ds Max? I'm learning how to translate my Sins of a Solar Empire skills to StarCraft 2. I need a more complicated example to look at than what I've got, because you don't really have anything to start off with, and the help file, quote unquote, for their art tools is worthless. So he's like, okay, here's some 3ds Max files, and then I get to like take apart things, because I don't work with tutorials, and a lot of people have told me the same thing. It's like I take things apart, and that's how I figure how things work. And as an end user, that doesn't mean anything to you at all, because you're not involved with that. But as a developer, it's like you have seen communities, like I've been with over like 24 games or something modding, or at least researching them in depth. And I see this on both sides. The people who are very open, very talkative, lots of discussions, willing to share their stuff and whatever. And the people who aren't. And then the communities of the people who aren't, they're tiny and they're dead. And that's basically StarCraft 2. This is a couple people who develop systems, and then they use map protectors, and then nobody plays the map because the game is dead. And any would-be developers who are otherwise struggling with the game and the editor aren't able to do anything with it either.
Yeah, I mean, in
And
StarCraft 2, you don't even have to protect your map per se. You just tick a box when you're publishing it to Battle.net, and that's what happens. So it's
yeah, so
then you can't even download it. Well, you can. You're
you
obviously
can get
downloading
it
it,
out
but
of your cache. You
yeah,
just
you
go
would
to your
have
cache
to.
file by modified and find it and open it up, and there you go.
Right.
You got it. Unless I changed with Legacy of the Void, but before I basically would just go in there and just pick open files, rename them to map file,
I
open it up.
think
There you
the
go.
only
You got the
thing
full
they
map.
did special in that is that I don't even know if they've been cracked yet. Is the Nova Covert Ops DLC maps were locked away, and this actually really pissed me off because I was at that point in the environment trying to figure out how to design some terrain thing for whatever purpose. It was some sort of urban area, and that expansion pack, that DLC was filled with urban areas, and I wanted to see what techniques they had used to make areas that didn't destroy CPU, because I typically just spammed a lot of doodads for the sake of making things look nice, and that was pretty hard on lower end CPUs, but I couldn't even open the maps.
I can actually answer that. Don't use objects with collision, or
So
there
the
was
collision...
a specific kind of doodad. If they've got collision, it treats them as units, and the pathing engine actually overloads.
Okay.
There was a guy in Mapster. He had a map. He's like, "Hey, this lags a lot. Can you tell me what's wrong?" And I looked at it, and it's like all of his doodads are like units. And I changed them to be doodads without collision. It went from like 10 FPS to 100.
Yeah, it's pretty fucking ridiculous.
But yeah, I mean, like in Blizzard's eyes, obviously they're like, "Oh, we want to protect our DLC because someone's just gonna re-upload it." But I mean, that's kind of what moderators are for, right? There's ways to check that stuff.
Yeah.
Very, very easily through a service on server
And it's
side.
not like there are even a whole lot of like communities where you could share offline files. There's StarCraft 2 Mapster, and that's it. And it's not even a fucking community. They have Blizzard employees in their goddamn Discord server. They can keep track of where this stuff goes. I was
People
inquiring...
employees anyways.
Yeah. I was inquiring about the 2016, 2017, or whatever art tools that then at some point after that you had sent me. And I was asking about those in that chat, and somebody deleted that message and DM'd me and was like, "Don't talk about that. We have people in there." It's like, all right, dude, what do you think? They're going to KGB you or something? What are they going to do? But anyways, that's sort of an aside. But
that's fucking hilarious that they deleted your message about that.
Yeah.
I should just post those. I would actually just post those on their forum. But their fucking software is so bad since they updated. I can't even post or do anything in Pale Moon on that forum anymore. It just like throws me a random error.
You also would need to link your Twitch account to sign in anyways, so...
What?
That's not even a joke. In order to post on the forum, you have to have a Twitch account and you have to link it.
Holy fuck.
Yeah. That's next level.
Holy fuck. Wow. I mean, if Mapster wasn't dead before, like the 5 people who went there definitely won't go there anymore.
Yep.
That is.
I don't know what possessed
both
them to
not
make that
surprising
change.
and at the same time thoroughly disgusting.
I don't know how they possibly would have, like... I just know that I was trying to skip the linking, and it just redirected me back to the same page infinitely. So, and the same exact thing happened to probably 2 or 3 other people who had tried to log into that forum, like time span a couple months. So definitely a doozy.
This is really AAA.
Yeah, that's like if Blizzard mandated Facebook integration before you let them like play their games. Sure, they're on the warpath for that one soon enough, but it's
they've already teamed up with
we're talking about the
Facebook,
Twitch drops,
which is you know, one of the most illegal services in the Americas.
People are just
that just gets by because
that,
they hand money or hand information to the feds.
They're dropping that service pretty quickly. I'll probably join them soon enough. But the what was I going to say? The motivation for these custom content developers in StarCraft 2 is basically like there's nothing left to motivate you. Not that there really was much there to begin with.
But I mean, like, just independent of the platform. Like, let's look independent of the game and monetization and stuff for a moment. Like, one thing that never really got me in all my years of dealing with this stuff and talking to these people is why so few of them really push themselves to improve, to make better stuff. Now, I think most people who develop stuff, they have kind of like a median or a standard they want to reach. But
Right.
it's like, when I look at Arcstar and this other map, and I've been aware of both these people for a long time. I've only really talked to one. And, like, Tia has been there forever, making terrain at the minimum, random maps. And then to have something that is now given the spotlight that doesn't even have the most fundamental of terrain or graphics in it, like that, to me, that boggles the mind. Because to me, it's like, once you've gotten comfortable with something, it's time to expand your skill set and go for greater heights. It's time to broaden your horizons. Like, especially if your end goal is to become like a game designer, you want to have at least rudimentary knowledge of all the different arts of game design. So some of them you can't do in StarCraft 2, like programming, but many of them you can, like graphics and sounds. Now, it's true that StarCraft 2 has very, very severe limitations that prohibit this kind of stuff, but you can make campaigns and single-player content that feature all of them. You know, there's lots of stuff like that. And I believe predominantly most of Pirate stuff, except for Dwarven Combat and maybe a couple of others, are single-player. So that's not really an excuse either. But it's like, to go from Dwarven Combat to this and not using fully custom assets, like that to me like boggles the mind. Now, I'm sure he has a good reason for it. Time constraints. Maybe this all came on short notice. Maybe he didn't want to. But like, to me, it seems like you should want to. You should want to improve and broaden your horizons, widen your gap, you know, expand your lower to the higher, you know, do something. And this is independent of StarCraft 2. It's stuff I've seen forever. So, you know, like, we were talking about Laconius to a fair extent.
Mm-hmm.
And Laconius tried to make StarCraft stuff for a really, really long time. And Vile Aggression came as a result of the CC contest for StarCraft 2 beta.
Yeah, I forget what year it was. 2000.
Yeah, it was like 2009 or something.
2009,
2008. Yeah. Or it was really close to the beta anyway, so it would have been like 2009 or something like
yeah.
that. So he repeatedly told me afterwards the only reason he had ever gotten anything done was because I was on his balls for the entire time. And he really liked Vile Aggression, and he wanted to make Vile Aggression too, but he could never bring himself to do it. He could never bring himself to do it. And I, still to this day, I'm not really entirely sure why, but I think it's because the drive was superimposed by his interaction with me to begin with, and since that pressure was no longer there, he suddenly realized that he actually really didn't enjoy the whole process anymore at all.
Yeah, I mean, people were assuming, and I think he even went on record in one of the posts that he made, that the reason why Vile Aggression was made and other projects hitherto had not been successful, had not been deployed, whatever, was actually because of the contest. And then that was proven wrong when the next contest in 2011, if I'm not mistaken, came around. He started Whispers of Extinction, posted like 2 screenshots about the Overmind allying with Tassadar and Ric Flair becoming a lurker, and then never was seen again. So, like, there's...
and he told me it's because I wasn't there. There wasn't that pressure there. And I think he realized he actually really didn't enjoy custom content. But this is the thing. This is all on the backdrop of him desperately trying to get into Blizzard. Desperately trying to get into Blizzard, making these cinematics for StarCraft 2 and stuff. And by making cinematics, I mean Labyrinth made them, and then he took credit for them. Like that's actually literally what happened. And at every turn he was denied because Blizzard doesn't care how good you are. They only care really about the proximity. That's why, you know, some people get into Blizzard. Like the one guy I know who was a level designer for Diablo 3. He started off in Blizzard as a quality assurance for StarCraft 2's editor. Well, bang up job there, Billy.
At least they're consistent.
Now they call him a senior game designer, even though he's never designed a game in his entire life. And the only thing he'd ever done prior was reskin some stuff in Warcraft 3. But he was in a college where a recruiter went to for Blizzard. So that's how he got contact. That's why they say networking is the #1 thing about getting jobs. But this is the thing. Look, this guy obviously wanted to get in. He may not have had the skills or you know, whatever, but he wanted to get in and he was in the right place at the right time. Laconius wanted to get in. He definitely had more skills, but he didn't actually want to do anything in this vein. He didn't actually have any drive. The motivation wasn't there.
Right, so he could have made another campaign, and he could have made it better than his previous one, but for whatever motivational reasons, he even had the motive to do it. If you believe that making custom content for a 1998 title will get you into the developer, who's no longer developing content for that title and hasn't been since 2007 when their last patch came out. If you believe that will actually help you get in with them, then that is a motive, I suppose. But the idea that he then did nothing and canned all future projects, and I don't know where he is now, playing Minecraft with his wife or something. I don't know. There's
wife Laconius. Are you?
Yeah, that's just the old joke
you
of
pulling my nuggets, son.
That's when Patrick told me that Vitreus was Laconius, and then said that he was eating shrimp ice cream and stuff. I don't know. Vitreus is a completely different person. Yeah.
Shrimp ice cream, Jesus.
Yeah, he's like allergic to everything. That's the only thing he can eat is shrimp flavored ice cream.
Well, that's
maybe Patrick was just on mushrooms when he told me this story. I don't know.
Motivation is a weird thing. I talked about Mildog before in League, and how he was like in silver and he would stream, and he would like try to like police his incredibly toxic teams, and he'd tell me how it was really tiring and stuff. But the process of him streaming it to me was what kept him going. And that's the same thing for me as well. When I'm recording LPs or World of Warcraft or whatever, I'm doing it for the videos. I would never play these shit tier games like freaking Conan and God of War and Last of Us and all this other shit. I never play any of those. I never even touch them if I wasn't doing an LP. The LP for me is a motivation. I don't get monetarily compensated for it. I don't get famous for it. I don't even publicate it. But I used to, really long time ago, with Warcraft 3, early Warcraft 3, and like 2004 or 2005 StarCraft, when I started like really getting good, and I was like, I'm at the top of this game. I know my shit. I want more people to know that. And obviously I was really young. I was really juvenile and really kind of pumped up on that testosterone, that success. You get that initial success and you want to ride it. You want to be recognized for it. But what ends up happening, of course, is that you start paying more attention to that than you do the actual project. And obviously I struggled a lot with finishing projects for many reasons, not just that, but that definitely contributed, because you get really depressed when that doesn't happen. That's why I was talking about these people who are looking at like these Reddit posts and stuff. It is such a hollow, false thing to look at some arbitrary number on some data mining website go up that has literally no relationship to your project whatsoever. There are bots that downvote and upvote just for the fuck of it. There is what people call downvote fairies who downvote things just to downvote it, just because it's there just to downvote it. And it pisses people off so much.
I like the one where you're trying to get one of your buddies' posts upvoted, so you downvote everything that isn't that for no.
And of course, there's the services you hire. I got lots of PMs about this on YouTube. Either services that have bots. They have VPNs, or like a video you're watching. I was watching anyways. I don't know if you've seen it, but the Chinese companies. They have like little sweatshops and they're full of phones and they're all tied to a network. And the exclusive function of those phones is to botnet upvotes and likes. That's it. That's literally the entire purpose of them. So you pay them a thing, you get, thousands and thousands and thousands of likes and subscribers or whatever you want. That's the entire function. So the whole system, likes and upvotes don't work in any platform whatsoever. But especially for something related to this. And yet that's what these people are riding for. They're riding for that adrenaline rush of being recognized as an authority of something or as being capable of doing something. But when you look at any of these projects, be it like StarCrafts or a map or something, there really wasn't any of that going on at all. Especially in StarCrafts, where the vast majority of the work and the only reason the project even managed to survive at all was made by people who aren't even associated with this project on this platform at all. They'll never be recognized. We weren't even credited in the actual thing. They don't even credit us. It's just is bamboozling, because that's what these people care about. First and foremost is recognition rather than substance. And that's why they don't stick around. That's why you don't see post-support. That's why Blizzard doesn't fix bugs in their games or whatever, because they don't actually legitimately care about the project themselves. They only care about that, the first sales or profit margin being ranged. And that's what modding becomes, is people become much more political, much more, marketing driven. It's the same poison, greed is a sin and all this other comical stuff that you don't really think you're going to get into, because I'm just a small guy making a map and now I'm going to get compensated for it, but it always turns out different.
I really I want to echo a point that you made earlier about motivation allowing you to do things that you normally wouldn't do. It's not just to do the things that you initially think that you want to do. It's also about playing Flame Knives on stream for 3 fucking hours straight, suffering every second, saying "oh" at the top of your lungs every time a certain character speaks. There's a lot of things that go with that under normal circumstances you would never do, but because you can commiserate with a live audience and because you can release the footage afterwards as a VOD or whatever the case may be, there's some value in that. And one of the things I repeatedly say that's almost a joke but is actually true is that now I know that not a single other soul will have to play this campaign, because they can just look at any moment of this production and say, no, I don't think so. And that's good. That's good for me. I hope that I've genuinely done a service to this world by having everybody else dodge a bullet. But the other thing that I've started to do recently is I've started to try and stream my production on projects more. And it's not really about recognition, like, oh, cool, look at him, he's making this project. But just the idea, nobody even has to watch these streams, but the idea that somebody could somewhere, I mean, I guess you could push the record button instead of the stream button and then try and walk yourself through it in the same fashion. You could be, the idea that maybe this footage could be used, maybe this could be a developer diary of some kind. It forces you to be on your A game. It forces you to not, go on forums and try and do whatever shit you want to do that's like impulsive stuff to really check stuff. You're supposed to be on point. You're supposed to be working on the thing. And the idea that you can motivate yourself in a similar fashion to play your A game with regards to that is a really useful thing for developers, and at least something that I'm only recently discovering, I suppose. But the idea that at any point I would change my tune because I would start to get financially compensated. I mean, people have asked me numerous times or referenced numerous times that I should go and work for Blizzard and develop official DLC for StarCraft 1 or something. Like, that's a fucking reasonable idea that would ever happen. But even if it were something that were in the cards, I would absolutely not say yes to that kind of idea. The idea that, yeah, I'm going to do something similar to this Bethesda stuff where they'll contract me out for a specific, on-the-spot amount of missions for a particular thing. And the amount of weird shit that would have to be true about that would be me like having complete creative control and freedom of it with no timetable, with probably a lot of engine limitations removed, a lot of assets created, like all this stuff. I would basically be demanding a similar amount of requirements to just be a creative lead on a video game, an actual game development team at that point. And there's no way any reasonable company, any sensible company with any degree of business sense would hire out that sort of thing. And those would have to be the terms, or I would simply reject the offer. And I would have to be in a really desperate place, like No Fucking House kind of desperate place, in order to consider that any other way, because I would be knowingly compromising the quality of my work for a paycheck. And that's not something that, the reason why this is a hobby and not a job, and the reason why I'm really, really grateful of that, is because there are certain things that maybe you can minimize the amount of quality loss that you get from working on something that used to be a hobby but is now a job. There's plenty of people like casting League of Legends that I used to do as a hobby. If I went down that road a little bit more, and I could do that I could be so disciplined with it that I became as part of the elite crew that works over at Riot Games. I'm sort of using air quotes here. The elite. But you get the idea. Like the idea that you could take a hobby and discipline yourself so much that it could become a career and a genuine career path that is reasonable for a creative person to have. I think that you can do stuff like that with certain disciplines or certain hobbies, but the idea that I'm going to make a campaign, the idea that I make more than one a year is pretty fucking, like, that's probably doesn't happen. I make one a year if I'm lucky, and that's sometimes not even accurate. Maybe it's one every other year. And the reason for this is because I do take as much time as I need to walk myself through the entire process of writing the story, writing the scripts, getting all of the levels done and just right, and scrapping a bunch of tests and figuring out what I want to do. And whatever that process is irrelevant to the end user, but the process is what makes the product. And the fact that I would be limiting myself to any sort of timetable even, let alone anything else that would come with the red tape of having that as a career, you're really compromising the quality of your work if that's sort of what you're doing. Yep. And it's not the same thing as being a broadcast talent where you are the product walking around. Your voice is the product walking around. That's very different than generating something essentially out of nothing with your own skills. That takes this time and this iteration process that forces you to look at what you've done and poke holes in it and then find ways to plug those holes and redraft the entire thing so the holes don't exist to begin with, and learn from your mistakes. And really, a iteration is really the key word here, because you're iterating between projects just like you are iterating between individual aspects of that project, and individual iterations of a map in that project, or a unit concept that you're doing for a total conversion, or whatever the case may be. There's like countless man hours spent on stuff that never sees the light of day, but in some way manifests itself in the final product, just because it was iteration number 7 of this thing that you didn't nail until it was iteration number 30. Like, you still learn something valuable from that experience, and that's taken with you. And you lose all of that. You lose any ability to spend all of that time that is super necessary to spend if you want a high quality product, when you decide, I'm going to do this for a career, and I'm going to commit to making 1 of these a year or 2 of these a year. And that's just something that would never sit well with me. And that's why I would never be able to, in good faith, say, unless I was in a really desperate situation, as I described, accept some sort of position like that. And I mean, I don't even know where you would begin to try and monetize your mods or maps in Skyrim or StarCraft. You
start by having no standards whatsoever. Because this is the thing. You remember I was talking about this guy. He was the team lead or the modding lead for StarCrafts, and he hooks up with these random nobodies to make this YouTube Red thing, and he's desperately trying to convince me to help them because I've basically got no one in the entire StarCraft 2 community who can do what I can do, or what I taught HKS to do.
Well, wasn't the only one who had any degree of sense, was it that Cave Rain character ended up just joining Oracle instead and leaving them or something?
Yeah. So I think Cave Rain, they ended up going to him for that. I'm not really sure who did it, but whoever did it did a fucking terrible job of it. But this was the thing, though. I say that, but the thing is, this guy was trying to convince me so fucking hard to join. He was literally saying, like, you don't need to put in the effort. Like, because I was concerned that I couldn't make other people's vision, because what makes Carbot so easy is he gives you the graphics, and it's like, well, I know what to do with this, because this is already, like, pre-animated. But with this other thing, it was like, someone gives you an idea, and you got to make it. And I was concerned that while I had, skills and Fume effects and stuff like that, I probably wouldn't be able to get into somebody else's head and make something that they themselves would have envisioned. So it's why I don't like writing for other people's projects. I don't like making fan mods or fan campaigns. I only do something on my own, because even if I felt like I could rewrite something, I typically don't. And I don't like adding on to things, because if I can't capture the original vision and keep true to it, it's going to be an inferior product, and I don't like making inferior products. But this guy didn't care about that. He's saying you don't actually have to try to put effort. He's literally trying to convince me that I wouldn't actually have to have a quality standard with what I was making. All I had to do was just meet the bare minimum. And the amount of money they were offering was like in the thousands of dollars for a couple months of work. And it was like, I could make use of a couple $1,000s. My computer hardware is 10 years old. At any point, something could fuck up and I'm just screwed. A couple $1,000s would go a long way to basically future-proofing my setup. But at the same time, I wasn't willing to deal with these people who are both incredibly unprofessional and actively encouraging me to make low-quality content. Because no matter how much I'm being compensated for doing so, I do not want my name associated with something that is low quality, plain and simple. That's just never how things have gone. When I was young and trying to get famous with StarCraft and Warcraft 3, and I took a step back and I thought, wow, I'm being really stupid. All these projects are getting absolutely nowhere. I haven't learned anything useful in several years because I think I can just make teams and get other people to do things for me. Obviously, that was something I had problems with later on, but that was with people I knew and sort of less expected than this. But it was like, I thought because I was good that I could encourage people who were also good to help out, but there was no one like that, and the expectations weren't met. And I didn't actually actively pursue my own stuff because I was no longer interested in pursuing my own stuff. I was no longer actively interested in making the project. I was more interested at the end of the road being recognized for the project. And that's the problem with stuff like monetization is you're already at that stage. And you're talking about broadcasting. Broadcasting is actually insanely difficult for that now because you have to be so fucking politically correct.
Yeah.
You can't say anything that will offend anyone anywhere. Otherwise, they're going to go to your sponsors. They're going to phone every frigging workspace in your local area. They're going to try to destroy you. They're going to try to demonetize you and all this other shit. And if you're hooked up in monetizing your broadcasting talent, you say a single thing that offends one person off in fucking South Africa, you're finished. You are finished.
I wish you were into this the CSGO's esports scene because you would love what happened to Sadicist, one of the best, hands down, commentator for the game. Got too drunk, slipped an N-word in on one of his birthday streams. He's out for a couple months. He might not return. And it's just, I mean, whatever you want to say about the specifics of that situation, he is the best commentator that this game has. Probably the entire world, all of esports. Like, you won't find a better guy than this guy.
Very, very similar story. Orb or something like that with StarCraft 2. When it was first getting off the ground, he was a big caster. I think he said N-words in some stream of his. Immediately, a massive spam to all of his...
sponsors,
investors, and they yanked him, and that was it. That was it for his entire casting career. And it's like, if you are broadcasting casually on a stream for your friend, and some random person complains, and that can destroy your actual official business, like, notwithstanding how absurd all that is, it's just an overhead that's going to impact your casting. Because you always have to second guess. For me, I don't have to second guess anything. I can say whatever the fuck I want. I have no consequences whatsoever because I'm not monetarily involved. I have no sponsors. You can't do anything to me. But if I was, it'd be like I wouldn't even be able to speak half the time because more profanity comes out of my mouth in 5 minutes than you are going to see in the entire breadth of every League of Legends caster. And everything I say goes against every single terms of service a company would have for somebody officially casting the game, in that I am a critical person. I look at things and analyze things. You know, I break things down. Companies hate that. They don't want you doing that. When you have the speed running, you're familiar with GDQ, Games Done Quick.
Yeah, I heard all about the one of the most.
You heard all about the SJW thing.
Yeah.
Well, it's all the inner relationship with that is you can't say anything that is detrimental or insinuates a developer has done something wrong in their game. That's why when you have the Skyrim run and people are like, this game is very well programmed. And it's kind of like tongue-in-cheek. They can't actually say the game is bad.
Yeah, that's
they can't say the
insane.
programming is bad.
They have to sarcastically praise it. That like, at what point are you just a funhouse mirror reflection of a fucking real interaction between human beings and video games? Like, at that point,
and
just
how much
stop.
shoehorning there is in there, where they're trying to market it to the SJWs by having all these trannies who play these games because they're progressive and inclusive. And not because there's really anything like good to come out of it.
Yeah, I think the drama that I heard was like a rape joke or something that was pretty fucking benign.
There was a guy. What I heard is they thought a guy was wearing a Make American Great Again hat.
Oh yeah, that was the other one. Because there were two separate incidents. Maybe I'm misremembering.
And it was because of they were like using that as an excuse to oust him for something unrelated. and
But
because
it was like make something great again though. It wasn't even make America great again. It was like one of those
I don't
memes
know.
where
I
they
think
say
it was like
make
somebody
whatever.
else who was wearing the hat too. Like you can see it, like the stream and everything on it was just.
Because like one of the persons on the couch like put it on that guy's head or something, and then they were like, "Oh my god, get him out!" That's that's insane. That's like its own
insane, like
department of insanity where this guy wears something different.
Yeah,
and he's
like
out.
You can wear this hat about Trump, and I mean, people are that butthurt about their president who got elected in by their own country.
Hashtag not my president. Hashtag me too.
Oh, this fucking Americans are so juvenile about this shit. It's just insane. I just can't get over that whole thing. Like that's what I mean. Like he wasn't even a broadcaster. He was a runner.
He was just a player,
right?
Yeah.
And you get screwed so easily by just making the slightest, even the most slightest of missteps, because everything has to be so safe spacey now.
Well, this is a big problem with League of Legends players, actually, not even just the broadcasters, but the players, if they got upset in their ranked games because somebody was trolling, and they were like, started fucking, going off like, dude, you do this every game. I really fucking hate playing with you, except with a lot more expletives or whatever they happen to say, like poor choice of words, whatever the case may be.
Well, look at Overweight.
You're
Blizzard's doing that with Overweight too.
Oh yeah, well, don't put the tryhard.
They fine people. They actually charge people money for something they said on a completely unrelated platform. Like, is that even legal?
Apparently,
how does it fly in your country?
Something like that. I don't know how because you sign a separate agreement when you agree to become an Overwatch player, an Overwatch League player. So it's probably in that agreement that you have to like abide by certain rules and regulations with regards to your social media presence, and they basically own your social media presence. And if you
the whole this is a system that drives the interactions that create things like the StarCraft 2 marketplace. Like the whole system from the ground up is just fucked. It's just fucked beyond repair. Utterly fucked. Because the thing about Skyrim is, while a lot of people are really not into the whole paid mod things, they're really all up about begging for Patreon donations, which is just as bad. There's a lot of stuff that's Patreon restricted only as well, even though that's like entirely illegal. And like the entire concept of somebody making money off of something that isn't even there is hysterical, because you actually have no legal power over your mods whatsoever. Anything you make within StarCraft or Warcraft doesn't even belong to you. So the whole concept of being compensated for doing something with somebody else's work is just, I always found that really funny that anybody tries to justify that, no matter how much time you put into it. But the motivation thing is funny because a lot of these people will never actually complete a project. No matter if they're like in it for the money or in it for creating something of their own.
Yeah, regardless of their motivation, like the amount of people who start projects is way higher than the amount of people who finish them. Big surprise. No. I mean, I was one of those people for the longest time, and still I've released one project out of my innumerable, probably hundreds of different projects, even if they're just ideas that I've tried to start on. There's so much that I've got planned. There's so much that I had planned that I've abandoned, especially a bunch of stuff with teams or just a single other person who's been completely unreliable and also doesn't know their own gender. There's a huge amount of issues with these people. And just the idea that you're going to somehow self-motivate enough to get through all this stuff. I mean, your best bet is to try and learn the restrictions that define the hobby of modding in the first place. Figure out like the game that you're going to mod and figure out what the restrictions of that game are. Like what do you give up by modding in this game? And obviously you already know what you gain because you've played the game for X amount of time and you want to know that you want to mod in it. But what do you give up? What can you not do? And then once you've sort of learned the basics, you can start trying to reinvent the wheel, but it's going to take a long time. It's going to take many years probably if you want to make something that really strikes for the top. And I was able to make what I consider to be the best campaign Brood War's ever seen, and as my first released product, But it was only after a lot of hardships that were suffered as a result of me constantly starting and abandoning projects just because I couldn't find something that was just right. I couldn't find something that satisfied my inner critic. And
Well, that's why I tell people, you want to make a project, ask yourself, what is it you actually want? And for most people, your immediate answer is going to be wrong. What do you want to make? Because that's what I started. Because that's when I like struggled with like Sins and StarCraft 2 and stuff. It got to the point where it was like I didn't even want to try to work on something. I was just so disgusted with everything. And you ask yourself, well, what do you want to do? And it's actually a very hard question to answer in many cases, because a lot of the time the reasons that drive people to making custom content are not reasons that are going to last a long time, and that's why they find struggles with motivation.
Right.
Because in order to be motivated, you have to have a passion. And in order to have a passion, you have to have something you really want. You're really going to strive for. Like, that's what always fascinates me about, like, the Koreans and stuff playing in professional gaming. And, I mean, even in the West, too. You got League and you had, like, these American teams that they have a really good, like, playoff season that gets to the tournament and they always flop hard. Like Cloud9, TSM, stuff like that, they always get just demolished.
They would never really make
at the
it
end
too
stretch.
far.
Always. Yeah. It's got to be really demoralizing. But they keep going at it over and over and over and over again in futility, but they keep going at it. So they've got some kind of drive going on. And I don't think just the drive to be paid for it, because they're definitely getting paid a lot. I don't think that alone is enough to force yourself to keep facing that disappointment over and over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, the big story was, I think it was season 6 that, maybe it was 7. No, it would have been 6 that the season 6 Worlds, that summer split into Worlds, the team had actually cut back on streaming hours, so they were making less money than they had ever made historically, and the players were performing the best they had ever played. So something was driving them to. These are not young players either. These are players who've been playing for between 3 and 5 years probably. So
yeah.
Besides Biofrost, I guess.
Brood War, you've got the Koreans, and you had the S and A ranks. You had like Jaedong, Flash, and then you had the lower ranks like Killer and stuff I was talking about before.
Right.
And these guys are very young, and they train 6-8 hours a day or more, and they basically have no chance of getting into that OSL finals. But they keep trying. They keep trying. Now it's their job, is basically their job at that stage. But you're not going to be forcing yourself to do that grind every day, all day, endlessly for years and years and years. You go into military and you come out and you try it again. You're not going to keep doing that unless you've really got something you really want out of it. And that's really what separates them between most Western players. Not all of them, but most of them. A lot of Western players see gaming as just, something they can make a quick buck off of without actually working. So you'll find that the training regimes are not nearly as in-depth, not nearly as focused.
Yeah, they're not nearly as invested in what will be the end product, whatever they're looking for.
But they require it to succeed against those teams. That's why Koreans are the master race, because they're really invested. They take it very seriously. That's their motivation. That's their passion. And some would argue that that's not a very good passion. It can be very destructive.
I mean, they basically have no social life at all. Yeah, they are ground into against the stone constantly. Yeah. And it's definitely destructive for their psyche. But yeah, you're right. That is exactly
what it takes. If you want to make quality, you got to be prepared to do that. And that goes with making stuff too. That goes with making content. So when we look at these projects that are being brought to the forefront as paid content, I find it incredibly embarrassing as a developer, because this is a game. StarCraft 2 is no longer a young game. It's 8 years old.
Yeah.
It should have been torn apart by now. People should be gods at this game. We are still publicating and pushing content to the forefront that has basically no custom anything going on at all. There's nothing new or exciting or grabbing about anything that has been developed in StarCraft 2 since its inception. There was a dude that was showing client-side physics movement for actual 3D maps years and years and years and years and years and years ago. I don't think it ever got anywhere, but that was the only thing for StarCraft 2 that really caught my eye. I think that people like Part, who put a lot of time into these systems, they made some really impressive stuff, but it's only part of a project. To make something, especially something that someone would ever feel justified paying for, you have to have a completed project. And as a developer, your ultimate goal is to create something completed. Your ultimate goal is to create something that has been fleshed out.
I gotta go AFK real quick for a sec. Keep talking.
And StarCraft 2 just doesn't really have that. Not necessarily because the tools aren't there, because they are there. You can use Audition 1.5, ancient as fuck. That'll handle pretty much all the sound editing needs that you could want. As far as music is concerned, maybe you're not a composer, maybe you don't have legal access to the, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of sound fonts you may need to produce something of high quality. And all this stuff is sort of understandable, but at the same time, you have resources available. You can plunder all this stuff within your license, such as, for example, all Blizzard titles to establish music. And voice acting is not actually that hard to get into. If you're passionate, you'll give it a shot. And that's the thing about passion, is it will already be serving to drive your desire to expand outwards and improve. And passion is a difficult thing to place into words. Passion is one of those things that is kind of a vague subject. It's a subject that is difficult to objectively quantify in a manner, at least from a person that is looking through a looking glass and looking at something. It's easy to say that a low quality project probably didn't have much, passion behind it. But when you're looking at a project that evidently did have effort placed behind it, but is still very much incomplete, you start to ask questions like, why is it incomplete? When the tools and the resources are available to make something greater than it is, but the developer makes no effort to make something greater than it is, you've got to start asking questions. You've really got to start asking questions.
Well, with the example of Pirate, it's really, really strange to me that I've seen more impressive stuff from this guy in the past, and I mean, we're admittedly we are extrapolating from a very, very small example. It's like a tiny little video that doesn't really show too much. It shows like one or two gameplay scenes, one like meme reference thrown in at the end, very Blizzard, and like it's not really anything of a showcase. It's I don't really know what it's showcasing. Like you might as well just have put 5 random unrelated screenshots or something. It doesn't. Yeah. That's like, it looks like, I would have expected more information out of like the arcade map screenshots of any given arcade game's arcade page. And the idea that you're not even seeing that much information, I mean, that's kind of striking. But even with what limited stuff we saw, I feel that his Dwarven Combat mod or map or whatever, his entry into the Rock the Cabinet that claimed victory, I think way more impressive to me.
No, he struggled a lot with latency because StarCraft 2 has this inherent latency and everything, and getting the latency to work in that map to the stage that was actually playable was a real struggle. And eventually, it got to the point where you could actually play it, and I felt like that was like one of his greatest accomplishments. And that's not to say that the turn-based design doesn't have merit. I think it most certainly does. I think there's a lot of unexplored potential within turn-based gameplay, but as far as like a centerpiece for something that's supposed to be you paying for content, I just feel like that, is like all 8 years of StarCraft 2 have just somehow been forgotten. We've forgotten that we do actually have an art tool, a exporter for 3ds Max. It may not be feature complete with the game now, but you can still create and modify content with it. We do have means to reverse engineer Blizzard assets and improve and fix all the problems with them. We do have means to create custom textures and make the terrain not look like shit, but everybody seems just to opt out of something that requires extra effort. And as an end user, I see that, but as a developer especially, it's like people seem to have forgotten what it means to pursue improvement. And I also have to go AFK now, so it's a good thing you're back.
I guess so. On the topic of pursuing improvement, I mean, I sort of touched on this when I was giving my impassioned speech about what really drives me as a creator and why I take so long to release my projects. And I think the key takeaway there is definitely the idea that you have just the concept of improvement. That really is my goal. It's not like, yes, the goal is to release a project, but there have been plenty of projects that I haven't released that when I make the admittedly difficult decision in some cases to abandon that project and to at least put it on hold, but maybe that inevitably sees it not being finished, I still have something that I've taken away from the experience. Most recently, and I'm not even making definitive statements as to whether or not I've abandoned these things, but I have attempted some one-off maps that were just one map completely by themselves, but they used some sort of new element of AI scripting, or they demanded something unique out of the modding or map design or something. And the bottom line was, without getting into specifics, is that I came away from that experience without even finishing the project yet, maybe never, and I know something now. I've developed a new technique or received a better understanding of level design or whatever the case may be. I've somehow improved despite not releasing anything. And that is the goal when I sit down to work on one of these one-offs. And even the existing projects that I've already worked on, like Project Hydra or Inconsummate's Update or the sequel to Inconsummate or any of the other innumerable projects that I have and have not talked about. And the main goal is to improve my process such that I can create superior projects in the future. And yeah, eventually I would like to release these projects, but that's not what I'm going into it thinking. Like, I'm going into the development of a project thinking what I want is to create something, and if it's good enough for me to want to finish it, then I will finish it. But it has to justify its existence. It has to strike for the top, especially in something like StarCraft 1, which has been out for as long as it has. And this is exactly the same thing that Mesk was talking about when he mentioned that StarCraft 2 is no longer a young game. It's been out for 8 years. People should know how to do stuff in it now. Yet we still can't even do basic fucking AI stuff with it. The big problem with that is very much the fact that if you're not striking for the top, if you're not trying to make the best campaign you can possibly make, you, the creator, can possibly make, with all of the resources that are at your disposal, with the innumerable tutorials that I myself have made and that Necron has put together for AI, and all of these resources that you have at your disposal, these people like Necron and myself that you can simply ask questions about modding and we'll answer you readily without any hesitation. We'll make entire videos dedicated to explaining concepts to individual people. There has never been a better time to work on something like StarCraft 1 content than now, because you have all the tools at your disposal. You have all of the resources at your disposal, and you have programmers and modders and people like Necron and myself who are very experienced with this game, ready to do stuff for you to make what you want to make work. If you'll only learn the basics first, if you'll only experiment enough to make sure that this is what you want, so that you're not wasting other people's time when you inevitably don't work on anything after you initially make contact. When you simply experiment with the idea of working on a project, and you simply make something, and you figure out if you're ready for it, if you're cut out for this kind of thing, if this is something that is motivational to you, you can do that. And then you will find people like myself, like Necron, like Knave, like Voyager, like Fardew, like Suicidal Insanity, who's created SEM Draft. These people are more than willing to shed light on their projects, shed light on their tools, explain stuff, update tools with certain suggestions you may have if they are good enough and useful enough, etc. And it's just, there has never been a better time. But the central motivation is not to sit down and say, I'm going to make a project. It's to sit down and say, I'm going to make a good project. I'm going to make the best project. Whether that's now or in 2 years after I've sort of attempted a couple of different projects and eventually completely canceled like 3 different ones, and maybe I'll work on 2 other ones later, but right now I'm working on this one and it's the best one I've ever worked on. And it ends up being the best project. Well, then that's when you know you've succeeded. It could take a long time. It could take no time, but it's really on you to make that happen. And I do think that motivation, the central motivation that drives me is the idea that I'm going to get better after every single map that I make, after every single project that I ship, and update and finalize. Every step I take towards producing another project is another step towards improving my own capacity for creating projects in the first place. And if you don't have something like that, if you don't have the core identity of trying to improve yourself as much as you're trying to improve your projects, then I think you're getting into it for the wrong reasons personally, but I may just not fully understand what other people's motivations are. That would be something that would be really interesting to have a discussion about. So I guess if you have comments on that, feel free to let me know in the comments below. In general, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about custom content on this podcast is not just because Mesk and I are people who have worked with custom content, and not just because my channel very much revolves around the existence of custom content in many ways, but it's also because I wanted to start something of a dialogue on the part of custom content that really doesn't get talked about too much, and that really is the motivation, what people are in it for. And like I said, I'm in it to improve myself, to become a better project lead, to become a better designer, level designer, AI scripter, dialogue scriptwriter, whatever the case may be, voice actor, graphic designer, even publicist when I end up, video editing, putting together my trailers and posting in certain areas. Like I'm basically doing everything you would want to do if you were designing a game. And I may not be doing it as thoroughly as if, there was one person for each role on a team of people, sure. But I'm still doing it in some capacity or another. And that's what I never really learned until I worked on Consummate. It was that there's a lot to releasing a project and supporting it post-launch that you will never understand if you just work on a couple of projects and cancel them before they get too far. Now, what I ended up doing was I would have maybe 6 or 7 rough outlines of maps, and I would finish 1 or 2 of them, and I would have a bunch of dialogue written and some mod work done, and I would know exactly where the story was going to go. And then I would just cancel that project. And the whole idea behind it was not that, at the time, my mindset, I was just talking about the fact that, my mindset back then was always, I wanted to make a project, and not I want to make the best project. I need to figure out how to hone my craft such that that is even a realistic goal. And I was sort of riffing on the idea that, when you start out, you're thinking that you're ready to reinvent the wheel when you don't even know the basics. I was trying to make an RTS gameplay, an RTS campaign without knowing how to fucking modify AI scripts. It's like, sounds so insane to me looking back. I look back at my design process of missions.
Well, that's how StarCraft 2 campaigns are done. No one modifies anything.
Yeah.
No one even uses AI scripts. People still call them build and destroy campaigns. They don't even have the most basic fundamentals of build and destroy.
Well, I was looking back at the way that I put together maps in the olden days before I worked on AI scripts. And I thought, like, the process, the time distribution, it was mostly designing, like, the terrain. I would spend an awful lot of time doodadding every nook and cranny and stuff. And
well, that's how Warcraft 3 was.
Yeah.
I can't even begin to recount how many people post about Warcraft 3 projects because they got this map and they've got, like, 30,000 doodads and not a custom model in the entire game. When one model would save you, like, 10,000 doodads and all the performance. That's the problem with StarCraft 2 as well, is people go through the effort of building all these doodads and then they don't even have, like, just merge a shit in 3ds Max, and just so much less pain to go through.
In Warcraft 3, it doesn't even seem like there's much of an excuse because that game is so figured out. That's like what StarCraft 2 should have been done, like, by now, 8 years into its life cycle.
I mean,
people are
StarCraft
still
2,
making
as soon
tools
as the
for that
3ds
game.
Max tools came out, it already was 4 years old. That should have been it for the game. There really was nothing more to explore in the game in terms of technical stuff, because it had already started off people who knew 3ds Max. They quit, sure, but it's still something that could have been approached by their descendants, so to say, because it was an intoxicated tool. As fucked up as they were still a point in which you could get some stuff into the game to see how it looked. But the thing with StarCraft 2 is at that stage, anybody who actually had interest in making custom content, like to make custom content, had realized, this game is trash and the editor is trash, and it wasn't made by anybody who had ever actually used the editor before, because the editor was just like blind compiled with a library in .NET based on Excel files, and Blizzard never used it, and people recognized that who are developers, and they were like, well, I'm out of here. Basically. So
Yeah.
and of course all the people who went in there just specifically to make money.
Well, there was no way to do that back then. They didn't announce it. They were 8 years too ahead of the time. That's all. 8 years ahead of the curve. Just like the Diablo 3 auction house.
It's like when you are selling a product, your goal as a developer is to improve and have a more feature-filled and complete product. But you can't do that as a mod developer because you will never develop something that is actually an advancement from the original game unless you basically redo the game.
At which point, just make your own
nobody
game.
in StarCraft 2's community possesses a fragment of the skills necessary to do that. So why are people obligated to give them money? They're not. They're not going to. They shouldn't, anyways.
Yeah, I have no idea what the end result of all of this will be. I don't know how much money they're actually going to be looking at making. I don't know.
A lot more than they should.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing is, maybe you asked me a year or two ago, I would have thought, nah, people are smart enough. But
no, people are not smart.
I struggle.
People pay for loot boxes and overweight. Like, you can way more justify paying for a mod than you can for a loot box in a game you've already paid money for. Because at least, like, the map or mod you've paid for is, like, something different than the base game. Whereas, obviously, with overweight, it isn't. It was always there. It's just a hue shift on something, so...
Yeah, you've basically just unlocked a 2-byte text file that unlocks content that you already had loaded, because...
That's the wondrous thing about all this fucking DLC and all these games, is you just, like, change an ini file in half of them, and you suddenly got it all. You know, like, pre-shipped with it.
Yeah, well, that's actually something interesting, is that CSGO has... Valve has somehow gotten some weird thing that will ban you. Not ban you. It'll close your game instance or something and force you to restart after it patches if you load custom skins into the game and try to play offline. Like, you would have to actually like disconnect CSGO from your internet somehow. And this is really exceptionally dumb because it means that you can't create like a pseudo, like if I wanted to make, there are single player maps that exist in CSGO, but to my understanding,
Counter-Strike had a huge custom kind of community.
Yeah, and to my understanding,
massive.
They don't actually have the ability to change the appearance of the guns, the gun models that you hold in your hand.
You used to be able to.
Russ, certainly you can still do it in the files, but you can't in the sense of playing the maps. And I imagine
so it's even more locked down than when I looked at it.
Yeah, that particular thing they're very sensitive about, especially since there's so much about...
Since it would destroy their microtransactions, because their quote-unquote reskinning system doesn't even hold a candle to actual custom content.
What
but
really,
it's the only thing they can keep locked down, so
I mean,
they're protecting that monopoly.
How much skin sales are because the players who are buying them, the users that are buying them, want to have a cool gun to look at, and how much of it is related to the fact that they want everybody else in the game to look at it. Like, that's a weird thing about it's like the same weird mindset that you have to get into pre-order StarCraft 1 Remastered so that you can get a fucking lens flare Nexus and a
StarCraft Remastered
palette
is
destruction
such a joke.
Hatchery.
I can't even believe that Blizzard got away with that, much less that it was successful. That's so mind-blowing to me.
Well, they didn't really escape much. There's basically, like, I go to the battle.net forums a lot because it's really, really just a hilarious place. Yeah. Like, you get the occasional apologist who's like, too afraid to even say, this is good. Instead, they just say, what do you guys think of Blizzard now? And then the rest of the people are just, game lags! Is remastered already dead? Well, everybody is toxic! Like, they just all, like, the front page is filled with screaming. And these people really, really getting upset. And I do not envy the position of the, what are those guys called? Those
CMs?
Brand ambassadors? Yeah, CMs. Community
that's
managers.
what they had in the Mapster IRC, allegedly, but I think it was actually like Mapster staff posing as CMs.
That would be hilarious.
Because they had the names of people on Blizzard's forums that they claimed to be from Blizzard, but they weren't, and nothing that I ever talked to them ever manifested anything outside the company. So it's I take all that with a bucket of salt. But I mean, Blizzard doesn't really moderate their forums anyways. I think that the report function is automated, and all the blue posts for the most part are bots. Because I made a thread to report that they had fucked up all the replays in Heroes of the Storm with their Kel'Thuzad patch, and I bumped that thread for about 5 months, and then HKS and Stake posted in there, and then suddenly got a blue reply, and it says, well, look into it, smiley face. And like a year later, and it still isn't touched, and...
No, I think that's just how, I mean, you might consider that a bot. I think that's just how Blizzard talks to people now.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Smiley face.
It's, when you can't even make that distinction, you've got a problem.
Yes. I would say so.
This is definitely a very big problem. Blizzard's communication with World of Warcraft and everything else in their forum has been an absolute joke.
Well, their communication is pretty clearly at fault here, I would say, given the fact that nobody knew, besides, I guess, these two arcade developers, that this map marketplace was finally coming out 8 years after it was initially promised. And the idea that something like this, that completely would turn the custom content scene on its head, if there was a custom content scene, was just not talked about at all. Not whispered, not announced beforehand.
It's
just
still amazing that they're doing this and they still don't have the updated art tools, something to handle facial animations, raised limits, stuff to actually facilitate real custom content in this game at the absolute limit of what the game can handle. They're not actually actively promoting real custom content.
They're not even fixing core issues like the fact that you can't use AI without the game destroying your fucking CPU. Like, good luck. Good luck making an actual custom campaign with crazy large-scale RTS gameplay without just completely redoing half of the engine at that point. Like, there's so much that you'd have to do.
Man, it's just bad and everything. It's horrible. And then all the censorship on top of it, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah,
it's not a platform that encourages custom content. It never has been. And people from Hive Workshop, I believe, they cried when I made a post on Team Liquid and said, custom content for this game is going to be trash. And I pointed out all the reasons why. I pointed out why the marketplace is going to kill people's motivation, how there's going to be a lot of isolationist policy between people who do get places, how the size limits of stuff are going to completely kill any actual large-scale projects, and the kind of community that Blizzard formed by creating the promise for money and all the other shit related. And it literally happened word for word. And lo and behold, none of those people stuck around. None of those people deny it now. And what you end up with is something really pathetic. Because, in spite of all of StarCraft's limitations, I still think that you could, hypothetically, create some decent single-player content with it, but nobody has the drive to do so. And it actually kind of brings me back to discussions with SAN. How utterly stupid most of the people on SAN are. Where they're stuck making these Battle.net maps instead of trying to apply their skills to something actually worth their time. These people who invest dozens to hundreds to thousands of hours developing this shit to do on maps and Battle.net where they're never going to get any recognition, they're never going to get anything done that's actually like an advancement in the game, when they could spend like 2 minutes in that edit and accomplish the exact same things, make a mod, a campaign, play with people they actually know who will actually communicate with them and actually accomplish something in the game. Like, it's unfathomable to me to spend so much effort reinventing a wheel that had already been perfected in years and years and years past, just because you're too scared to get into modding? Like,
that is something that a lot of people
odd.
echo. The idea that there's some value somehow in working within the limits of an existing system instead of trying your
I
best
mean,
to
limits teach you a lot.
circumvent them.
They do teach you a lot. As a learning experience, working within limits can keep you really honest to your goals. But that's independent of this. This is people literally choosing to make things massively more difficult for themselves because they're so concerned about the potential impact of a bunch of invisible nobodies that they're never going to interact with, because they're more interested in being popular in a platform and a medium in which they're never going to be a part of than they are in actually making a high quality project, than they are in actually making something they're actually going to stick with. These are the same people who burn through tens to dozens of projects, all of them, more faceless than the last. It's just, that's what's become of StarCraft, is like no real custom content, just a bunch of people circle jerking over an invisible crowd that doesn't even exist. It hasn't existed for years, basically never existed. And it kind of brings us back to SCN's history with Maplantis, and I wasn't a part of the site for that splitting, but the whole thing, when it was described to me, it sounds so incredibly comical, how people were actually scared of mods. Probably because it challenged their authority over mapping and rendered everything they had done entirely worthless, because it was just simply better and faster than everything they had done to this point. They couldn't just fess up to the knowledge that, the platform was changing and that content was changing.
I mean, this is a similar reaction to when I tell people to stop working on maps in remastered and just make your shit in 1.16.1, because you're going to have way more consistent outcomes and you're not going to be fighting the system itself to try and make something happen, especially if you're trying to do mods in remastered. Jesus fucking Christ. And
Remaster had such potential to be so good for mods. You could have expanded all the arrays and shit in the executable, enabled the ability to add data entries. You could have had, the graphic system being overhauled was a big deal, because you could have had access to things like normal maps and actual lighting. And yeah, you can do that in 2D. You definitely can do that in 2D. It takes some setup, but you
I don't know
definitely
what the hell their texture stuff is using. I know that
But now they're using DDS atlases.
Yeah, so they use that, and they have a standard definition model, and then they have 3 variants of the high definition model, one at 4K for when you're at normal resolution, one when you're mid zoomed out, and one when you're really, really far zoomed out. And those are in like increasingly or decreasing
The zooming
detail.
thing is such a pointless thing to add too. It is so pointless to have.
Yeah, it's supposed to be
like
like
a game like StarCraft.
Well, you can't zoom at all in melee anyways, but you can zoom out in replays. And then you can zoom a little bit in, but not out in campaigns.
It's funny because Age of Wonders 2 has zooming, and it doesn't have multiple sizes, and it looks just fine when you zoom in. I mean, obviously things get pixely, but that comes with the nature of the beast.
Well, yeah, I mean,
all Remastered is doing is increasing your GPU load.
Yeah, and I don't know why so much money, or not money, but I don't know why they spent time working on variants of the same sprite with less detail loaded than the previous variant. Like, that time could have been spent making the file format not completely atrocious to work with. By the way, there is actually a program that will allow you to export and import remastered graphics now. It came out a couple days ago, so you could literally just rip the entire thing and put the skin pack on 1.16.1 if you really wanted the new graphics for whatever fucking reason. So there really
yeah,
is,
but they're so fucking... They're so out of style. The lighting is off on all of them. All the Zerg looks like a hideous mess. The Terran is just so goofy.
You want to know what the funniest thing is? That all of the screenshots I've shown you are with like the most optimal settings. Like everything's toggled off. All of this stupid bloom shit is turned off. If you saw what this game looked like normally with all of those extraneous settings ticked on, where there's like impossible to read things, where Badlands just has random burrow holes that look exactly like Zerglings that are burrowed just on the map. Like, how the fuck do you read that? On top of the fact that like projectiles modify the lighting around them, and it looks bad, man. That, like, it looks like a different game. It really does. And I don't really know how else to explain it to you. I'll have to show you some screenshots or something after this is over, but it's a disaster, all right. So I guess as we wind things down here, I have to, I guess, ask at this point, like, the map marketplace, how soon before it goes the way of Steam paid mods, and hopefully not
it's already
back.
there, basically. I mean, that's what the system is Blizzard is like, hey, these people are really greedy and they want to make money, and we're really greedy and we want to make money, and we don't really give a shit about the quality of their project. We hold no illusions in that what we've been publishing on this platform is utter trash. And all the things we said about how we will only market high quality and really like fully featured projects is obviously all a lie.
Well,
so
they're showing 2 unfinished projects as their main flagships. So
I mean, on one hand, they don't really have a choice. Like, what else are they going to show? There is no one making anything more complete.
They would have to upgrade existing. Well, I mean, actually, it's really funny because that Direct Strike map is actually out right now, and they're upgrading that to a premium status with additional features or something. But you can.
I mean, when you only have like 3 or 4 people in all of StarCraft 2 actually publishing map content, you don't really have a big pool to choose from of what you want. Blizzard kind of has their hands tied in that one. On one hand, they want to be incredibly greedy. On the other hand, it's like, do we actually have to choose? Is there a choice? We may as well just go with whatever. I mean, you got to make your money somehow.
Yeah, exploiting poor old pirate is the only way. I guess it just rolls back to the...
I'm sure he's happy with the arrangement.
I can't imagine it's that much. They say it's a share. That makes me think it's like...
Oh yeah, the entire purpose of it is for them to introduce microtransactions. Because people are under the mistaken belief that they should be paid for a hobby, and Blizzard isn't going to say no because for them it's free money. They're getting a cut of every payment. So for them it's like having loot boxes in StarCraft 2, except they don't even have to do hue shifting. They don't have to do anything. They get such a massive discount on the bandwidth they're paying. It's nothing for people to download stuff. So that's not any investment on their behalf either. It's literally just,
well, that's stuff
we don't
that
give
would
a shit
be...
what these guys publish,
Yeah.
just so long as we get money.
Well, it's funny because the bandwidth costs would be negligible anyways, because odds are the projects would be done anyways, even if they weren't being, like, if they're being paid for it. Maybe that'll make them release it a little bit faster, just like all of those fucking ass Creed games. But other than that, I mean, they would have come out anyways, right? So you get into a situation where it seems pretty pointless to try and...
No, it's a zero investment thing. See, that's how smart business works. No investment, maximum return. And there is no greater business than having somebody else do your work for you and not have to pay them for it.
It's fucking crazy to me.
That's why PUBG has streamers doing their marketing for them. Marketing is expensive. Let's have other people do it for us.
I'll never understand Battle Royale games. Well, I guess we've sort of set our pieces on this one. So other than wishing Necron a happy birthday, what shall we close out with?
Happy birthday, Necron.
Happy birthday, Necron.
If you're trying to make a project for money, don't bother modding. At least put some effort into it and try to make an actual game in something like Unreal 4.
Fuck yeah.
You'll get further, you'll achieve more, and you'll be much happier with your end result. And the skills you get with you will actually last the test of time, unlike in StarCraft 2, where you only learn bad habits.
Yeah, and shitty, like, boilerplate workarounds to problems that you can't solve, but you would be able to if you had full control of the engine, like in Unreal. So there you go. That's the podcast. Thanks for tuning in.
Podcast.
Toddcast.
Toddcast.